Hey guys, I wanted to do this video really quick. Um, my favorite spiritual books. Um, Here, let me start with the one on the left, Getting Right with Tao, Rana Hogan. Um, Great book. I remember it's the first spiritual book I've ever read. Um, it's the Tao Te Ching, but a modern version. Um, I remember the first time I read this, I felt like I discovered the truth of the universe. Very good read. If you've read the Tao Te Ching, this is just a modern interpretation. It's not as the language is not as archaic. The language is more modern, but it's just very sweet, very simple. And if you've never read the Tao Te Ching, it's ancient book of wisdom, ancient book of Chinese wisdom, um, and it's pretty much about the Tao or the way and the path of nature. It's very much about nature and um, yeah, I think it has a very poetic language and has a nice rhythm to it. And just the act of reading it, I feel like puts you in a great mood. So the next one, and these are in no particular order, by the way. Um, J. Krishnamurti, Freedom from the Known. Um, I would say it's the most intellectual book out of all these. Um, it's a bit difficult to read. I actually had another book that I used to look up some of the words he uses. His language is kind of specific. But if you can get through this book, I think you'll learn a lot. He talks about his perspectives on authority, freedom, love, which he considers to be an openness and your true state, I guess, beyond the mind. I could use a reread on this one, but I remember it was amazing when I read it. He also talks about choiceless awareness, which is a state where you no longer make choices because your actions they just flow so freely, sort of like intuition. Pretty much every action you make is just second nature, and it's almost like you don't make choices anymore because it's just so clear how to act. So I definitely recommend that one. Osho, on the other hand, his language is a lot more emotional and it's easier to read. And he'll use stories and things like that to address his point. Um, so the first book is Courage, the Joy of Living Dangerously. There's two Osho books here. Um, Very good book. I could use a reread on this one as well, but I started rereading it, and just the first couple of pages just really, really snapped me into a bit of an awakening. He talks about courage being not the absence of fear, but the ability to move, the ability to act regardless of your fears. So, you might be afraid, but moving through that fear and taking action anyway. He uses some great stories to illustrate his points, and just a perfect book about taking risks. And I mean, I don't think you'll regret reading it. The writing is very enjoyable. And Osho is books on intuition, which I have a video specifically on that one. Pretty simple idea behind it, but again, a very good book. He talks about intuition being a state beyond logic, a state of knowledge beyond logic, or the ability to know without using your logical mind, basically. And the key thing is he breaks down three capacities of humans being intuition, intellect, and instinct. Instinct being of the body, intuition being of the soul or spirit, and intellect being of the mind. And he goes into great detail about the intuition. Lots of stories in there as well. A very enjoyable read. No Boundary by Ken Wilber. This was amazing. I think I read this recently, or it's one of the more recent ones that I've read. It integrates a bunch of spirit. It integrates all. I guess you could say a lot of spiritual and therapeutic approaches, and he discusses the different levels of the self that each approach would address. So basically, like, there's the shadow self, which is like the part of yourself that you I guess deny exists, and you sort of like project it onto the world. And then there's like certain, there's certain like therapeutic techniques. I believe psychoanalysis is one that addresses the shadow. And then you have like the ego, and you have the body. So like focusing would be a strategy that addresses the body, which this book is all about focusing, which I'll talk about in a second. So it talks about all the different levels of the self, and at the highest level, there's the self that is all-encompassing, which you experience everything as yourself, right? Like, there's no separation between the entire world and you. It's like you're part of the whole world. And that is made very clear in this book. And I think this book touches on like it brings together so many like spiritual ideas. That's why I love it so much. Like, he talks about time and future, and there's arguments about how time doesn't exist, and there's arguments about how death doesn't exist, because if there's no time, there's no future, and death is the end of the future of the self, or something along those lines. But that is discussed in great detail in this book. And he also talks about what he means by boundaries are any separations we make between the oneness of the world. So like, first there's oneness, and then maybe there's something that we deny about that oneness, and we make a separation there. We make a boundary there. So then we're separating ourselves from that oneness. And then he talks about how that causes issues. Like, he says that at every boundary there is a war, basically. But again, if you're interested, he goes into great detail about that, and it's an amazing read. He talks about like language and science and all those things in relation to spirituality. So, amazing book. Alan Watts, the Tao the Watercourse Way. I think this is the most recent one I read. It relates to this book over here on the left, Getting Right with Tao. This book is a very in-depth, rational explanation about the Tao. He talks about the Chinese culture, the Chinese language. There's Chinese lettering and stuff like that here, you see. And he describes how the language is formed and all that. And of course he talks about the Tao. So yeah, I think it's very good. It's a very intellectual approach to the Tao. The Tao itself is beyond the intellect, beyond the mind, but that whole idea is discussed in the book, how it's sort of strange that we talk about something that's beyond the mind by using the mind, but I guess it's the only way to talk about it. And I think the first part of this book is you get the line, Well, let me focus there. If you can talk about it, it ain't Tao. If it has a name, it's just another thing. Tao doesn't have a name. Names are for ordinary things. So I think another version of that is that the Tao that can be known is not the eternal Tao or something along those lines. But yeah, if you read the Tao Te Ching, you'll get a feel for what the Tao is. You sort of have to feel the Tao because it's something that's difficult to describe. And even if someone describes it to you, you might not get it. You have to figure it out for yourself. And then finally, this book, Listening to Your Angel by Kevin Flanagan. It's more. I was skeptical about throwing it in because it's not the most spiritual. It's more about like the body, getting in touch with your body, but it does have an intuitiveness to it, and you I guess you can tap into your intuition by getting in touch with your body first. And I thought it was a great book in general, so I threw it in. Spirit and body kind of go together. But it's basically about this technique called focusing that was, it's a therapeutic technique that was, I don't know if it was discovered. I guess it was realized that it existed by a guy named Eugene Gendlin. And he, I guess, described it in detail and made it known, and it's like a therapeutic technique that therapists use and stuff. But it's basically listening to your body apart from your mind. Well, actually focusing is like, it's like a connection between your body and your mind. And it's kind of beyond your ordinary mind, if that makes any sense. Like you have your thinking mind. I mean, you have your thoughts, right? And then beyond the thoughts, there are your bodily sensations, right? Like let's say you're leaving the house and you get this like discomfort in your stomach or something, that you like forgot something. So that is like a sign, or there's like a hidden message within like your bodily sensations, and you can learn to like tap into them. So like like you'll be driving and you'll like hone in on that sensation in your stomach and realize that, oh my God, I left my purse at home, or whatever, a book at home that I wanted to take with me. I think that's like an example that they give in the book. So basically, there you go. I recommend all these books. Hope you like my video.